Here we are, the Melbourne Storm. We've got a few little questions up there, sort of more so to help myself and Jesse, I guess, as we go to make sure we do answer a lot of the popular questions that we're getting asked each and every week around these teams. And we're not going to really hit these questions. We might do towards the end of each club that we do if we haven't really got around it, but we should get around to pretty much talking about all these talking points as we go. So again, we'll go through just each player position. So for the Storm, first up, obviously hooker is Harry Grant at 750K. Last year, I think he had he had an average of 73.5. So obviously quite classy, a class above pretty much the field for hooker last year, and that's why so many people are just paying the premium to get him in. A lot of people already know how we're going so far with this. As we said, like Supercoach, things always change. I didn't think I'd be saying I'd be running with Cleary and Hines, and so far it looks like I am doing that now. So you never know what could happen, but we have spoken about different options with Harry Grant. I guess the first question here that we got the talking boys is Harry Grant a set and forget?
Um, it's a very strong point, man. Like we've gone through our teams 1,000 times and looked at it, and I think when it comes down to the Harry Grant discussion, like at the end of the day, yeah, he is. You know what I mean? Like it's Harry Grant. He's going to be number one at the end of the year, and you can already tell now, barring any serious injuries, there's no reason why he won't be the highest scoring hooker again. Um, at the point you make, whether he's set and forget from round one, that's a different discussion altogether. It's one of those like you've got a sort of half bad run to begin with an early buy. He's priced at a 75 average break even as well. So like realistically, you think about it, he's probably going to make his break evens in the first few rounds. Like I don't see a dip in his points. But at the same time, you look at some other hookers who are cheaper, and you can kind of think they have that 75 sort of average output to begin with, and that's where their value comes up because they might score the same as Grant, or maybe just a little bit less, but they will make more than Grant will for the time being. So that's the sort of half point where you want to get that coin to go up to Grant, or if you have the coin, you just get him. But for those like high 500, 550-ish hookers, there's a fair few of them, even going up to Marshall King, who's just buying just smidge off 100K less. Like that's a lot of coin you get, probably for a similar output. So it opens up a lot of doors and a few avenues to upgrade other players in that position for what might be a very similar points output. But again, and someone might get a good score for a 50 or a 60, where for a Grant, that's a very average score. And that's the sort of quality of player you're getting. So it is worth the extra 200 on the other guys, but just depends on what your team looks like and whether you need need that extra 200, 150 odd K to really push the rest of the team up. So there are pros and cons for both. If you're going to get Grant in at some point, maybe after the bye, maybe after the Rabbits game, nothing says that he doesn't do what he does every single game from round week 1 onwards, though. So nothing wrong with starting with him, but I think there's a good amount of cash there, that you can get elsewhere. So it's tricky, isn't it?
It's very tricky, and the thing, like with the set and forget, like if you do select Harry Grant to start round one, you're obviously, as you said, like you're just leaving him in your team no matter what.
Yeah.
Like obviously, if there's an injury to him and it looks long term, I'd say time to part ways. And because I think with the Origin run for him this year, I think they do get nice timed buys as well. So I think getting rid of your Origin players to a certain extent is becoming a little less of the obvious play. Like there is some where you can just keep them, especially in, like, I'd argue Harry Grant's a good case of that, because if the season goes as we're predicting, he will be just head and shoulders above pretty much every hooker in the game when it comes to Supercoach when it gets to that stage of the season. But what we're saying, and where we've sort of both lent towards, and I've obviously been influenced by what you've said early on, but it does make more sense now, and listening to a few other things out there. But I can see there's Harry Grant for me isn't an obvious start for round one. Like it's just not one of those players that, like a Nico Hines, who is just screaming to me saying, you have to pick him. Like you have to go that way. I can see Harry Grant still being good, but as you said, to allow me to go other plays, I feel like I can get away with not having Harry Grant for the first, as you said, probably until they get their bye and maybe even a week or two after that, and
Yeah.
then jump onto him. And then you get probably a 6-week period there before Origin and that where you get some good scores from him. He starts warming up because depending on how the team goes next year, Queensland, he'll have like KP fully fit. He'll be pushing for that 14 role as well. So that could
Mhm.
mean Harry Grant could become an 80-minute hooker for Queensland and is really pushing his case for that because he'll be up against Ben Hunt in a head-to-head role because I don't see Queensland not picking Ponga if he's fit.
Yeah.
So you've got Walsh, you've got Ponga there to choose from. So yeah, Harry Grant's an interesting one. It is definitely one to keep an eye on, especially with our podcast. I reckon we're going to talk Harry Grant weekly at the moment. Like
Yeah.
it's weird. And the
Yeah.
thing is, when we go into the replacement hooker as well in Garlic, he's on an option, but for 268K, if Harry Grant's to go down for a long-term injury, I am 100% looking at Bronson Garlic.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. Garlic's position is pretty much nailed if something happens to Grant, and that's huge. If you listen to what we spoke about last week when we made the point about the Broncos and the Panthers hookers, they don't use them as an outlet very much. Nowhere near what Melbourne do with theirs. And it's always been like that. You look at Cam Smith and now Grant, like he's just picked up the reins and kept going with it. So, um, that just must be what Bellamy wants out of him. And, if Garlic's been in that system, you got to think that he would do a shift as well. So for that price, man, you would have to. But again, man, like Grant seems like he's made of stone out there. So there's nothing really going to happen
Yeah.
to him too often. But um, yeah, it's going to be one of those situations where you either start with Grant and you forget about everything, you ride him through Origin, you might swap him out for someone over the Origin period, because you've saved all these trades at hooker that you might be doing working up to him, just to swap him out for someone who looks, hot for the few weeks that they're on, and then you finish with him, or you just trade up to him. But it's a hard one at the moment. I'm sort of undecided too. I started with Grant last year, and I ran with him the whole year, and I traded him out at Origin for Damien Cook, I believe, because he wasn't selected, and I rode that out, and then I got Grant straight back in. Whether or not that was a good idea or not, probably was a bit of a waste of a trade in hindsight, but um, he was a lot
He's
dearer
human,
last year.
everyone.
Yeah, it happens.
He
Make some
makes
bad
mistakes.
calls. I make some bad mistakes, man. I didn't win, so there's obviously a few
Uh,
mistakes in there. Um, but he was dearer last year, and a lot of people started with him then. So I think it's just the rise of all the mid ranges now that sort of makes the argument against him a bit more solid. Because realistically, last year I'd sort of look at it and go, "There's no one else but Grant that I'd even half look at." Now there's a few in there that are priced really nicely, with a good amount of upside. So, um, like I look at Robson and think he could probably do the same thing that Grant can do for at least a few weeks.
yeah.
Might close the gap a little bit, but allow me to spend an extra 200K somewhere. So yeah, I think watch the space for Grant, and it'll be in and out chop. And if I can find 200K, I'll probably get him in, but at the moment, it doesn't look likely. So
And we will mention this for some of the players of interest we feel like for this podcast now that the app's fully out. At the moment, his ownership is at 25%, which
mm,
I feel like is quite low. Like it is very, very
yeah,
early. Obviously, it's been only one day. I actually feel like that is quite low because the way I'm hearing people talk, I've literally only heard pretty much us say Harry Grant isn't the only option. It's starting to become a bit more of the norm, but I'm surprised the number's as low as 25. I was actually anticipating when I looked at that number, 40s, maybe
yeah.
even close to the 50.
I
That's
was thinking
very, very low.
40s. Yeah, I was
Yeah.
thinking. Well, I was thinking at least 40. 45 odd, because he is the best hooker
People are
there.
listening.
Yeah, they are. Um, And you sort of run down the line, and obviously he is more heavily owned than the rest of them, but 25% isn't as high as I was expecting. You've got Marshall King 13, and he's the next best. Obviously, barring Jaden Brayley, it's separate because of his price. That's why everyone has him in there. But it does drop off, and it quickly drops into the low single digits. So it's very spread out, like very spread out after him. So we might see that number, inflate a little higher closer to the day. I think it's still, it's all very tentative at the moment. I mean, the app's just started, so people will just be going, "Sweet, I'll just put Grant in there for now." But Yeah, I reckon it does go up, really. I think close to the day, people start to think, yeah, Grant. So makes sense. But yeah, initially I thought it would have been a lot higher. So
Now, the front row forward position for the Storm this year, there was a couple of options last year. This year, for mine, it doesn't seem like there's much at all. And looking at the owner percentage, it's literally
no,
pretty much all zeros and a couple of 1%ers. So everyone's on the same sort of page with this one. So I don't feel like we need to talk too much, to be honest. Like, there's not even really cheapy options. And
no,
especially for the prop forward side of things, Christian Welsh was an option last year, isn't this year. His price has better options around that price for
yep.
mine. Nelson Sofa Solomona, who knows if he can kick himself into to gear, and we know how important he is to the Storm. He just seems to, I don't know, he just sort of seems to float a bit. Like last season, he seemed to
Mm,
just float quite a bit, and he's just in and out of games too much for my liking to be considered a super coach option. So that's all I've got to say on the front row position as a whole for the Storm. Jesse, I don't know if you got anything else to really add for it, but
mm,
there's just, yeah, for mine, there's nothing.
not really. I think we can glaze over it pretty quickly. Walsh obviously last year was coming off an ACL, so his price really low, and he worked himself back to pretty much exactly what his average is. But you don't want to buy him at that. You just want to get him low and get him to that. And Nas, yeah, he's a bit of a liability. He's got the dual, which is nice, but again, at 516, like I wouldn't. There's a lot better options out there, especially with their start. So yeah, nothing to write home about in the front row isn't at all. So
No, there's not.
no.
Second row forward, though, is a little bit of a different story.
Hmm.
Again, there's not too much ownership percentage to talk about, but there is one at right down the bottom, Jack Howarth. He's famous in Supercoach land now. I think he's more famous for Supercoaches than he is with his rugby league career so far. He's been very, very heavily touted throughout the couple of years. And he did play one game last year and got 44 from it. So if he can produce that this year and a bit more consistency, we'll all be all over this kid. He can play, but I don't know, something must be not right with his headspace. I think he mustn't be all there with training and just not getting picked. But we'll go sort of the top of the list, and one that was really popular last year was Katoa.
Mm,
He's priced at 656K though this year. For mine, I'm not going to go there for that price. Like I'm hoping this hard draw at the start might work him down a little bit. Then maybe he might be a play a little bit later on. But him and say Josh King as well. I know Josh King was super consistent last year, but again, it's just more so there's other options for me at the moment. Like Storm forwards aren't what I'm chasing if I'm looking at the Storm.
not really. Katoa, like I really like Katoa too, and I think he's just that little bit too expensive.
Yeah.
If he was just even in the 500s, I'd probably have a good shout to look him as well. But um, yeah, it's just nothing too exciting, man. They haven't really had anything too, outlandish as far as point scorers go in the second row for a while. And Katoa, I would say, is probably their best one. Well, you can show by the points, his average last year was the best one. So, but even still, like he
Yeah.
had that eye injury, he went missing for a while. He came back really strong towards the end of the year, just
Yeah.
belted out some massive numbers, and that kind of inflated that because if you didn't have that stint towards the end, I think he would have been priced around maybe Loiero or in the early 500s, and I would have been tempted. But now the temptation leans into Sean Blaw, um, who's someone that we're going to talk about anyway. He's not added in as a Storm player yet, but obviously he is now. Um,
What's he
if you want
priced
to
at?
go, Blaw, I think he's low 400s or
Yeah.
450,
Okay.
somewhere around there. So it's a nice price. Um, it just depends on where he gets the start. Like I'd be hard pressed to see him taking the position of Loiero, but it seems most likely.
Mm.
He's
Why
445,
why you
Sean Ball.
bring
He's
445? I was going
445.
to say why you bring up his
Yeah.
numbers. I'll say from a rugby league point of view for Sean Blaw, I'm excited for the move for him. I can see him being really good under Craig Bellamy. My concern is his body. He just can't seem
Mm,
to get consistent footy under his belt,
yep.
and that's not going to change if you change clubs. Like that's just a body thing. Like yeah, unfortunately, some players we've seen it in the NRL over the years just can't seem to stay on the pitch, and it becomes sort of a what could have been career for him. I really hope that's not the case for Sean Bloor because everyone knows he can play, and we've seen it when he played for the Tigers last year. He was trying to be one of those real hard style forwards for the Tigers when they needed it the most. And again, as you said, he could push Liera out of that position easily. But the thing is, Liera did quite a good job last year for the
Yeah.
Storm. So it's not like it's an
Nah.
urgent thing to get rid of him and replace him. It's like Blaw's got to really work hard to get that spot. Like that's one thing Craig Bellamy loves his new recruits to do. Can Sean Blaw's body handle that sort of preseason? That's the other thing. Like a lot of unknowns for Blaw, even though he's very nicely priced. If he can get 80 minutes consistently, we're all over it.
Massive. Yeah, it's and that's the thing. He's going from the Tigers to the Storm. Like you got to imagine that's going to take its
Yeah.
toll pretty quickly, man. That's from the bottom to the top almost. If he can handle that sort of thing and get his body in check, because I reckon it probably will make a difference, man. Like realistically, what have the Tigers got compared to Melbourne as far as facilities and just in general? But he doesn't walk straight into that position. You know, I mean, there's a lot of people expecting Tarek Sims to walk into a position last year, and he barely even got a game. So unless he proves himself, you know, and steps up and really makes a stand to unseat Loiero's position, I don't see anyone taking it off him. He didn't do a bad job, not enough to warrant him losing it. So I like it if he can get in there, but it's a lot of ifs and buts. So
Yeah. And we don't operate on ifs and buts in Supercoach either, guys. So
not at all.
get that thought out of your brain. Cheapy options. We've already mentioned sort of Garlic if he can get that sort of starting role for some points. We've already mentioned Jack Howard. Tepai and Moreau has just sort of always been around that sort of price tag and just doesn't seem to get enough work to
No.
warrant getting him in on board either. Joe Chan, really good talent in the works. Again, it's just about like they got, especially now with Sean Bloor as well, they just got a lot of players to fit into 6,
Mm.
7 positions. So it's more so you just got to wait to see, especially with their cheapies, a few injuries for some of these top line forwards, and then they might become a bit of a play. Who knows? Round 5, 6, 7, 8. Like if there's injuries coming up, then that's when you sort of look at those sorts of players.
Yeah, there's a lot of players in there that have had like one game, one game, one
Yeah.
game. Mariah had 6 games, but nothing significant. And a lot of them are duels, so you're going to get those games from, you know, bench rotation with the forwards. It's pretty much Katoa and Loyero, and that's basically it as far as they go for second rowers, with very little deviation unless, you know, Nelson decides to fill in for someone who's injured. But, you know, if they can blood Howarth a little bit, that's everyone's favorite cashy bottom dollar second rower from
Free
everywhere. So just give him a run. Give us the super
Bellamy.
coaches. Give us what we need.
Bellamy clearly hates Supercoach because if
He
he
hates it.
liked it, he would have had him playing 80 minutes by now. Let's go into the halfback and yeah, it's the halfback role first for the Melbourne Storm. Jerome Hughes is obviously a big one there. Um,
Mhm.
1% ownership, which is not surprising. 722K. I'll put my hand up. I had him for a couple of weeks last year. And he actually didn't do too badly for the patch I did have him for, but he's not someone that I feel like anyone sort of starts with this year, especially with that tough early draw. Um, Jonah Pezzett is not priced as a cheapie anymore, so he's someone that I wouldn't be looking at either. And the same with sort of Tyron Wishart for mine
Mm.
isn't really an option. Do you see any upside to Jerome Hughes for those players that don't want to go Cleary and Nico?
Not particularly. He's expensive. He's the fifth most expensive half
Yeah,
somehow. You know what
surprisingly
I mean?
as well.
I don't know how he, at the end of the day, he averaged more than Moses did, and I just didn't see him do it.
No.
I I never really see that out of Hughes though, and you know he had a good year. Was it 2 years ago, 3 years ago? He had a really really good year. But traditionally, it's always one of those like he might do okay. It's either him or Munster that really picks up the other one's slack, and more often than not, it's Munster. I would say so. Far too expensive, and I can see his ownership's 1%, probably for a reason. He did have that really good purple patch last year, where I saw him banging out massive points. But I think at that point I had Cleary and Hines or SJ and someone, and there was no way I was getting off any of those guys to get onto Hughes because you know it's fleeting. Like it'll come and go pretty quickly. And yeah, it's just not worth the ups and downs. Not at halfback and not for 720K. I think there's just far too much upside in those positions to get someone inconsistent. And yeah, obviously the draw to begin with is not ideal. buy for the whole team in the early rounds and just everything. You make the same argument for every player in that team, and I think there's just too many better options than Jerome Hughes. So if you love him and you want him in your team, by all means. But I won't be doing that. Yeah, help yourself.
5'8" is the only different option there is Cameron Munster, who has 5% ownership at the moment, 728K. He's probably in that little handful of players that everyone's trying to decide between. A fair few people have Dylan Brown as their sort of one of their musts or one of their musts in Supercoach this year. And if you're looking at someone different, look, I know they've already got the little hand signals on Supercoach app already, and he's got the thumbs down at the moment, Cameron Munster. So and they're not fans of starting with Munster, but he averaged 71 last year, so that's still a good average. But I don't know, something's telling me to stay clear of Munster this year.
I really like Cameron Munster as a footy player. You know, not as a Queenslander, not as a Melbourne's player, but just in general. I think he's just got a great game, and
Any other time,
he just
he
just breathes and generates points, and he's great. And I had him for a fair whack last year too. And you know, it was actually I think I had him until I got him after the Dylan Brown incident, and it was one of those like, oh, okay, I've got Munster now because it's not Dylan Brown. And I think a lot of people will make the same argument too. He's only a little bit cheaper, not massively enough to make some other team moves, but not a great deal. And you see the thumbs down, and it's only for the Panthers game because, like, he's not going to do much against the Panthers. No one ever does. But you look at the next couple of games, and you know, traditionally smacks the Warriors and smacks the Knights. So there's a few hundreds in there. 99 points in the previous games, 110. You know, going back. So you look at those scores too, if you've got the plus, and you can see, you know, he does do quite well. But you know, is it Munster or Brown? Because it's surely not Cody Walker by any means, I reckon. So it's a tricky one. I would still lean towards Dylan Brown anyway. I think you just find the cash and go to Brown for the more consistent base. You know, he's going to bounce back this year. He's got a better run for the longer term too. He doesn't have Origin, so there's so many factors when it comes down to it. And really, the only reason I would probably go back to Munster again if something was to happen at Dylan Brown. So it's pretty much it, really. He's an excellent player. If you can afford to have both at some point in the year after your team value's gone up and, you know, you've gone away from this starting lineup little debacle, you wouldn't be doing anything wrong having the two best 5'8s in your team. But I think for the initial startup, I'd probably be leaning towards Brown anyway. But yeah, Munster has his games. You know, it's nothing, 60 points out of nowhere. So
you are nervous if you do go Brown. You're still nervous watching Munster because you just know he does have that in his game. He's a Supercoach friendly player, and
if he could do what he does in very small stints throughout the whole game, he would probably be the highest scoring player in the season. But you'll get monster halves out of him and then completely disappear for the whole second half. That's the kind of up and down you get with him in the game. I think I had him for a few games last year where he'd scored I think he was on 80 points at half time. And I'm like, oh, shit, I'm on for something massive. And then he ends the game on 85 and you're thinking, what happened in that second half? What happened in the dressing room to say, just stop playing? So, yeah, it's not all, you know, rainbows and sunshine when you have him, but when he's on, he's on. So
the centre wings, there is some players here of interest. It's a really good position, I think, for the Storm. Straight up, though, number one, Nick Meaney has priced himself of mine out of the market after playing a lot of last year or most of last year at fullback. He is 694K. So he was scoring quite nicely in that back position. Even if I feel like Harpenhausen goes down early again this year, I don't think he's a play because there is another guy we'll get to shortly who I think will become that fullback. And Nick Meaney now moving to the centres, I don't think will generate an average of 68 points a game for this year. So
no chance.
Price himself out. Seve has. I'm surprised he's so high. Seve 527K. He averaged 57 last year, so he was a sneak. He must have just been one of those sneaky players that just plodded along, and whoever owned him was not too dissatisfied with what he was doing.
Yeah, he averaged it out of 7 games though, and I think they were more towards the back end where everything was kind of already settled. You know, everyone had your Osakos and your Marzus and that. You weren't getting onto Seve,
No.
even for whatever he started at. So he was one of those gems that kind of just went, untouched towards the end of the year. And he's been priced accordingly, and he's going to remain untouched, I think, for the whole season. So because he won't be doing a 57 average. It was probably just a big lot of games there. Will Warbrick was a gem, though. Will Warbrick was bottom dollar last season. Cheapest center wing you're going to get. And I held on to him for the longest time. And there was no reason to trade him. He was a prime cash cow last year too, just primo. And I think a lot of people jumped off early. Got a few good games out of him. Sweet, there's a little bit offload. Man, I held on to him for dear life, and he was an excellent play when I needed him to. And I eventually did trade him, but it's kind of the point now. There isn't anyone like Will Warbrick this year.
No, so you're obviously getting him back then. You'll start round 1 with the brick.
Oh yeah, he's going to be first player in my name, the team, gone straight in. I might even captain him. No, it's just
Ballsy.
that, like, you look at him now.
Big balls last year.
Yeah, man, huge. That's how I got there. I just captained Warbrick every round. Eventually, it'll pay off. A broken clock is right twice a day. So, if there was another great option, yeah, Supercoach wisdom. Tune in for the facts and stay for the philosophy. So, there's just no one at the moment. Even when you go through, not forget the Storm in what the discussion is at the moment, but just in general, there is no really good option starting wingers for 200k at the moment, and we might see him, but he was last year, and now he's been priced to what he got, 500. So that was an easy 300k. A lot of people jumped on, and he won't be going up from 500. You'll probably only going down. So it'll just be a little up and down thing with him. It'll just be up a little bit, down a bit, up a bit, down a bit. Much more consistent as far as that goes, and I reckon someone like Coates or Remus would be. Completely irrelevant Supercoach players, in my opinion. Just don't do it. They might be priced nice enough in a very strong team, but they do nothing out there. Absolutely nothing. So there's not a great deal of options bar Faalogo, who has unbelievable potential. Unbelievable potential.
To my man. Shout out to Faalogo as well. Reached out to the page the other day. He has seen the fact that I am obsessed with the bloke. Again, look at the picture of him. How can you not be obsessed with that?
I know. You're only human.
I shared his dance video he had on Instagram the other day that the people who follow the Storm would know what I'm talking about, and had a bit of a laugh, had a quick little chat with him. So he's a great bloke. Good on him. Love your sewer, and I am all over you this year.
Yep.
Let me start. I want
100%.
you to answer.
Please.
I want to quickly put my thing with Sewer, because you know how much I am obsessed with the bloke. Everyone out there who follows the page, especially on Insta, would see I've done a few reels already about him. I've done a few posts on him. I am obsessed. I am all for 2024 being the Sewer logo era, basically, where we get to see Butt. And I've got a question here. Is he a must-have? The answer is a no. I actually have got rid of him from my team, because the thing is, he's not priced at that dirt cheap. If he was priced at dirt cheap, I'd probably leave him. He's just an awkward amount where I can do a bit more with 100k. And until I know he's going to get guaranteed at least 60 minutes, I want at least 60 minutes from him to get good points. Ideally, I want him to start at fullback. That's ideally. I don't want to touch him yet. The more I think about it, the more I just think, even if he gets that 14 role, I don't think he's not going to be playing hooker. He's not a hooker. If he plays that 14 role, he'll get maybe 5-10 minutes in spurts. We know what Bellamy plays with those sorts of players, and it won't be much to get quick cash generation.
Yeah, I just don't. I don't see where he gets his minutes, man. I don't see where he gets his minutes, and it's a shame. Like, I really want to have him in my team. It's the ceiling. There is no ceiling. Like, the guy's going to go straight through and just keep going up. You know what I mean? Like, it's just, you want to see him get that run, and there's this massive argument against so many players he's better than on that team, I reckon, and you could just put him on a wing and just let him do his thing. Like, these other guys have had years and have proven to just score a try and nothing else. And you just think, just give him a go. I just want to see it. Whether that's from, a super coach perspective or actual footy in general. The guy's a beast. He's a little weapon.
Oh,
He's going to just blow everyone up. And I think he deserves to get a go. But I feel like it's just going to be a bit of a headache to have if you start with him and nothing happens there for a long time. Because again, he isn't that bottom dollar. He can't be, with that game that he played last year. There's no way you can place him at 200, 5K. It's just not going to happen. But yeah, 339 puts you real close to a couple of, half decent little cashy options there in the center wing. And it's like, do you run off the uncertainty and just sacrifice 100K to have him because he might get a start eventually? And it could be one of those things where he gets a run, he's not going to make anything for a few weeks. And like Munro last year, where he came in, cleaned up for those who had him, actually didn't change price because he didn't get the game to do it. It might take a bit of time. There's a potential that he might get put out there for 5-10 minutes and go down to basement price after a couple of rounds. If that happens, and I need to cash out of someone, I might even just put him in there as the bottom dollar placeholder just to have him and just brick the slot and just forget about it. But I don't think you necessarily should start with him. I think it might just be a bit of a
it
headache
pains
for
me to
now.
say it as well. It hurts me.
Yeah,
So I know you're listening to the potty because you're a massive fan of the show.
love your
I
work.
do love you as a player. I want you to get the number one position. I love Pappy as well, but I want you to get it because I am all for you this year. But if you, I see 19% ownership, and I think a
Mm,
lot of people are getting caught in the hype. I did that originally as well. He was literally the first person I picked on Supercoach. I made a big post about it, said he was my first one. I did it, but the more I sit back and actually think about it, and you have to, if you want to win this game, you've got to take your head and heart and make sure they're separate. And on this occasion, this is one where I've got to put my head on and go, I'll patiently wait. As much as it pains me, and to not see that name in my side round one, I have to be smart this year because I'm beating Jesse, and that's all I've got to say about it. So,
dreaming.
the last fullback to quickly talk, and he's again, he's as cheap for what he can produce if he can stay on the field, which is obviously Ryan Pappenhausen, 645K. He does have the down thumb little emoji by Supercoach so far. Again, it's probably because it's the Penrith Panthers.
Yep.
26% ownership. So he's quite high, especially he's probably the highest owned Storm player. I think he is even more owned than Green is for what we've seen there for the percentage.
1%. Yeah.
Yeah, 1%. So he's the highest paid. So we have already spoken about Pappenhausen at length, but we'll do it a bit more because it is the Storm section of it and
Yep.
people might not have listened to the other bit. But we're saying tread cautiously when it comes to Pappenhausen early on. I don't think even if you don't get on early, you're not going to miss out on too much, and he'll still be affordable for a number of weeks, in my opinion, because of the tough start. I don't think he'll be going 100 mile an hour from the get go. I think there'll be some plans in place to maybe even we'll see maybe him and Faalogo, maybe Faalogo will come on after 45, 50 minutes something and give him a break. Who knows? But I don't think I think Bellamy will make sure he won. Like if the Melbourne Storm are to go close or to win this competition, they need Pappenhausen to be fit. The best way they can do that is not via to rush him at the start of the year. They'll make sure he's fit by the end of the year. So I don't see Pappenhausen is very juicy priced and it allows you to do a few moves, but you've also got to make sure you get some points, especially early on.
Yeah, the points early on thing is very important. And I think it kind of gets left to the wayside when you're talking value. But his value is great. Like
Yeah.
645 for a fit Pap is a
Oh,
really good price because he was near a mil last year. You know what I mean? Like that was big coin for a player who can do not like there's not many other players that can do what Pappenhausen can do out there when he's on. You get consecutive 100 pointers with him when he's going. But he's had such an injury ridden last 2 years, man. And they're not just, little ones here and there or, he did his ACL and he was off for a whole season. Like he destroyed his knee and then he destroyed his leg and ankle. So those are pretty significant injuries that we don't know where he's going to come back and be. I hope he gets back into it and goes straight there. I still think the fixtures at the beginning don't help the argument to start with him because they're not the easiest runs. Like if he come out and he played like the Dragons with the first game, or the Raiders, or someone that you expect that's probably going to start off a bit rocky, you'd think, okay, it might be worth starting with him because you can get a good idea of his potential. But he's starting with the Panthers. Whether or not you thought that he was going to come out and blitz it, like he's probably not going to do that anyway. He's never had a good game against Penrith. His highest ever score against them looks like 53 points. Coming back off a very long stint away against the best team in the comp, you'd expect that to continue. And then he goes to the Warriors and then the Knights. So they're not the worst fixtures ever, but I still just want to see a bit more out of him.
So do I.
And you can afford to wait that long, because after those 3, they've got to buy, and then you've got an extra week to decide what's going on. So it's worth a wait, really. Like you can always get him in. It's obviously a lot of coin, and you might be cashing down from someone, or if you're running with a premium fullback and a really cheap fullback, it might be a lot harder to make that swap over. So you might, if you're very interested in it and you're curious, it might be worth just hovering close to it, just to make that switch to someone with like a Jaden Campbell, who's very close in price. You can see where he's going to be after a couple of rounds and maybe make that switch over. But I've thrown him in a few teams, man. I really do like Pappenhausen, and for that price, I feel like you probably want to start with him, but
So do
it's
I.
just far too much uncertainty around it to be locked in. Like 26% ownership is quite high for what he's coming off the back of.
Yes. I was surprised with that number.
It's almost like they have just sort of go, oh, well, it's Pappenhausen. You know what I mean? It's Pappenhausen. He's all right. It's like, man, it's you're going to take some recovery to get back from what he come back from.
Yeah.
I know he's running and I know he's doing all this stuff good again, but he did that after he come back from his knee, and it didn't take long for what happened. Also, it was a freak accident twice in a row. He'd have to be the unluckiest player in the league to have anything happen to him again. But if something does, or if he gets, rested, I can see that, but it's unusual to rest the fullback in general. But I suppose his situation's a bit different. It's not like he's just a bit unfit. Like he's got to get his legs back. So, Faalogo might get that little stint run, covering for him here and there. They might split it like he did when he come back from his first injury with Nico Hines. I think he just got knocked out clean, and he was off for a long time there with the concussion stuff. It was a really bad one. He was a plank on the ground. Like it wasn't nice to see. And it took him a while to come back from that. And when he did come back, obviously Nico did a lot of groundwork and he kept the team going for him. But they did rotate with each other. It was 20 minutes here, might have been half an hour for maybe 4 or 5 rounds. And we might see the same thing happen again. I still expect him to start out of everyone. I just don't know. I don't know yet. Still early days. It might be worth watching and just seeing what happens with the trials and how he's looking. If he comes out and he's just going ballistic and you think, oh, Paps back, then yeah, I reckon get him in. But it just have to wait and see on him, man.